Hello and welcome to CHP Talks. My name is Beth St Denis and I am filling in for Rod Taylor, who is taking a well-deserved vacation with his lovely wife, Elaine. For those of you who don't know me, I ran in the 2025 federal election for the Christian Heritage Party in the riding of Windsor-Tecumseh Lakeshore. I am currently the secretary for the newly founded EDA in Windsor, Essex County for the Christian Heritage Party. As well, I've served on a few committees within the CHP. I was on the Election Readiness Committee as well as the Brochure Committee. I am a business manager. I've been in business management for almost 20 years. I serve as a mentor for young adults and work with seniors in the seniors ministry at my church. I have a podcast called The Truth Trumpet on Rumble. And in my spare time, I am an avid roller coaster enthusiast. So that's a little bit about me. And today I am joined by my good friend Jeremy Palko. Jay is a good friend, and we have a great topic in store for you this evening. But I'm going to take a little opportunity here to tell you a little bit about Jay. So, Jeremy Palko is a dedicated Christian, father of two, engineer, politician, and community leader. He currently serves as the founder and CEO of a charitable organization. Jay was a candidate for the Christian Heritage Party in 2021 for the riding of Essex and ran for the Ontario Party in 2022 and the riding of Windsor West. Jay has been an outspoken advocate for parental rights and the well-being of children, notably addressing these issues at the Greater Essex County District School Board. Jay is active in his church as a Sunday school teacher and church volunteer. His passion for community service extends into his personal life, where he enjoys a variety of interests, including athletics, the outdoors, is a foodie, and has a strong appreciation for custom performance vehicles. Jay's faith in Jesus Christ drives his belief in the importance of Christian values in Canadian society. He advocates for a return to principles that emphasize reverence for God, asserting that Christian Canadians should reclaim their influence in the public square to help restore our nation's moral compass. Jay, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, and congratulations on your hosting opportunity.
Thank you so much. So today our topic is government sanctioned destruction of children. Now that's quite a mouthful, but a very serious topic. So Jay, why don't you walk our audience through our title?
Yeah, we'll do. So the reason I think that title fits is because our governments seem to have a very organized and intentional effort being made using our money, by the way, our taxpayer dollars, to rob children of their innocence and their mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And I find that to be particularly egregious as a Christian. I think more Christians need to realize just how bad it is, what our governments are doing at all levels. This is federal, provincial, and municipal that this is happening. And this is something everybody needs to be aware of, especially parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anybody concerned. And whether you have children or not, it doesn't matter. We need to speak up and do something about this. So I do believe that it is right to call it the government sanctioned destruction of children, because I think that is exactly what is happening. And Christians need to speak up, and anybody concerned for that matter, because this needs to stop.
Absolutely. Now, Jay has spoken in front of our local school board here in Windsor, as have I. We've appeared many times before the trustees trying to bring awareness to some of the decisions they made regarding our children. So, Jay, why don't you give some feedback to our audience about how those appearances went for you?
Some are better than others. How about that? We'll start there. But yeah, over the past few years, a number of times spoken to the school board at their public meeting. So not a committee meeting, but where all are present. And a lot of times what I had to say typically they allowed me to speak, but I was definitely not approved to speak if the content seemed to be a little more Christian or if they didn't particularly like where I was going with what I was going to say. But in the meetings, typically they did allow me to speak, but I would get my mic cut. It wasn't rare that it would get cut because of what I would say and how I would say it. So if I were to bring up inappropriate books or mention the Christian faith or perhaps mention DEI, CRT, or any of the trans type topics, they were not very happy to hear me out or us out on that. But we did have the one awesome meeting where we had the chair when Trustee McKinley actually had our backs, and they wanted the police to actually take us out of there just so people understand. It got to the point where there was no security in the room, and then they figured the security wasn't enough, so they brought police into the room. So one security guard, two security guards, and then ultimately two police officers. And that one of the last times that I spoke, one of the trustees, Ron LeClaire, he requested that I be removed from the room because I refused to not finish my speech. They wanted me to stop speaking when I started calling them out on certain things, DEI, CRT, and such. And then when I said, and that particularly what is not working for them is alienating people of faith. And that's when my mic was cut. There was a point of order, and the chair was requested to have me stop speaking. And then the chair said it's okay, but then they challenged the chair. They all approved of me not continuing to speak. So the challenge was won. And then he wanted me to sit down, but I said, well, the prior speaker got their 30 seconds, so I wanted mine. So I finished anyways, and that's when Trustee Leclerc, I don't know what shade of red he had turned at this point, but he wanted the police, I think, to put me in cuffs and drag me out of the room. But I finished my speech, I sat down, the police didn't move, and the on that day, I believe God, he divinely intervened and allowed that the chair, the acting chair, Trustee McKinley, to say, I didn't hear anything wrong. The speaking is over, and we're going to move on. Trustee Leclerc said that's atrocious. She sent, I think, sent an email, and they moved on. But the point being, yeah, they are very oppositional to what people who actually support the rights of parents and the well-being of children have to say. And we'll get into some of the details as to what they say versus what we say, but they do try to use the law and will actually abuse it against the public, which is so backwards and ironic and atrocious. But that is what they do, and that example I just shared is really, I think it shows the true colors of these trustees and what's happening in our school boards today. But we have I believe a duty and obligation, especially as Christians, to not back down, to go in there and say what needs to be said. And if they kick us out, well, then we pivot, and we'll get into that too.
Just to give you some context, we've been speaking in front of the school board for the last 3 years. Jay started speaking out against some of the books that were in the libraries. There were other issues that we've brought to their attention, trustee conduct. As Jay mentioned, they started having police at the meetings, and I actually was escorted out by the police just because the trustees did not want me to speak. So you might be thinking to yourself, this is a school board? This is a school board meeting? And yes, it seems that the public and concerned parents are not allowed to speak at these meetings. And in fact, our local school board decided that there would be no more speakers list. There would be no more delegations able to present at school board meetings. So the public can no longer speak in meetings, the regular school board meeting in the Greater Essex County District School Board trustee meetings. If you would like to speak, you actually have to apply to some of the different committees and speak to them. And in order to do so, you have to apply. You have to prove that you're a taxpayer as well. You have to give them your speech ahead and they have to approve it. So they make you jump through a lot of hoops in order just to be heard. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why? Why shouldn't a concerned parent or a concerned citizen, a taxpayer who elected these trustees, why can't they speak? And there are reasons for that. We've uncovered a lot of things that these trustees have pushed forward, a lot of things that I think the general public are unaware about. And I'm hoping through this episode that you, no matter where you are in our great nation, will do your homework, do research, find out what's happening in your own public school system. And I think you'll be shocked, alarmed, and appalled by some of the things that are happening.
Mhm.
So, Jay, one of the things that have gotten our attention is a regulation that has come up. So, why
Mhm.
don't you tell our audience a little bit about the history of this regulation, how it started, and how it's evolved?
Yeah, can do. I think one thing I'll share too as a little more of a, I guess, a background to this, and a lot of the things that we have heard repeatedly, and I think people hear repeatedly in other school boards, and I'm sure across Canada, is that our Ministry of Education, that they use similar like convoluted and torturous language as our school board, the Greater Essex County District School Board. So that's the Windsor Essex Public School Board. And they use deceptive claims like words like safe and inclusive that to try and justify what is actually dangerous and exclusive policies and regulations. So people just need to realize they're doing what is often done, and I'll say by the left. They hijack words and then they try to use them against us as if they understand what those words mean, including the rainbow. I mean, like, it's pretty wild what happens in a matter of a span of what seems to be a few years, a decade, and all of a sudden people are making up their own ideas as to what a woman is and such. But it's complete nonsense because what they actually try to say is that they are justified by the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Education Act. They'll say these are protected groups. That's why they wanted to kick me out of the room the one day. That was the attempted justification, is that he's speaking against protected groups. Like, no, I'm not. I'm telling you why your enrollment is flat or down, is because you guys don't know how to actually run an education system to attract parents to actually enroll their kids in your schools. They actually want to get out. And yeah, we actually have data for that to share. But these documents, the Charter, the the Human Rights Code, Education Act, they don't support having child pornography in schools, whether it's visual or written. They don't encourage gender confusion and dysphoria in children or promoting irreversible puberty blockers or sex conversion surgeries, or definitely not usurping parental authority. Like, that is not written into these documents, but somehow they try to say, "Oh, Ontario Human Rights Code, got to do it." Uh, no, like, that verbiage says to protect these groups, and I understand that language that's in there, but it doesn't say you can do all these other atrocious things that are actually hurtful and damaging, potentially lethal to children. So these are bogus attempts at fabricating a woke social justice basis upon which to try to attempt to sexualize children, and it's completely illegitimate and immoral. And but they do this over and over again, and despite our opposition and us being objective and data driven and sincere in what we're saying, and people who actually arrive in that gallery, which is say the people who are actually there are in opposition to what they're doing. They don't have a whole bunch of pride flag warriors sitting in that gallery. It's the people saying, knock it off, stop it. These are our children. You do not have authority over them. And they choose to ignore that willfully and pridefully and arrogantly, and they just can seem to just continue down this path to destruction, and it's an awful thing. So yeah, I can go into We can go into the regulation a little bit if you want. I don't know if you want to, at one point, maybe want to show the Gendy or the genderbird person.
Certainly.
The picture's worth 1,000 words. People might get a disturbing kick out of this.
So this document, I'm going to go up to the top just so you can see for context, is called Positive Space, Positive Place.
Yeah.
And this is a teacher guidebook. So this is the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario. This is something that they have printed. And there you have what appears to be a snowman. And it talks about four categories of human identity. So, Jay, why don't you talk a little bit about this diagram and the message that it is giving? Again, this is a teacher's
Yeah.
guide to
Yeah.
teach in the classroom.
Yeah. An education toolkit for well, the acronym. So you can see in the second paragraph there, it refers to this diagram, I guess, if you will, as Gendy. And it's also known as, you could also search on genderbread person. And when you think about it, how it's cartoonized, even in some of the bad books that have been in the schools that we said, hey, this is inappropriate in every way for K to 8, even 9 to 12. Like, what are we even doing? But they try to cartoonize pornography as if to make it more palatable to warp the minds of these children. It's really sinister, in all honesty. And people are like, well, is that really fair? Are you being too severe? No, no, we're not. This is 100% a really disturbing strategy that they are using. So when you look at this diagram, you can see at the top gender, and as if gender is in the mind, that how you feel determines your gender identity. But then what's between the legs is simply your assigned sex. But this does not determine your gender according to them. That you can have, I mean, I've seen it said 87 genders, whatever the count's at today. It's completely irrelevant. Sex is gender, and there are two of them, male and female. Genesis 1:27 is completely clear on that. We are created male and female. Our charter acknowledges that as well, that the rights and freedoms apply to male and female persons. So that was signed by, ironically, Pierre Trudeau. So somehow even the senior got it, but junior really screwed it up, and now Carney is making it even worse. And truthfully, in Ontario, yeah, we can blame Kathleen Wynne for bringing this in and all the rest of what went on at that time. But Doug Ford, to this day, is the one who has allowed it to remain and to become progressively and much more worse. So going back to the diagram, so your assigned sex, what we would say, how you determine, whether or not they're male or female, that is the assigned sex between the legs. What's in the head, Gendy is saying, that's where your gender is found. It's fluid, 87 plus, who knows how many there are these days. And that the attraction is in the heart, and then the entire body is gender expression. Now, these are children as this is being explained to. And I think one of the key questions that a person needs to ask themselves is, why does an adult have an interest or even an obsession with the sexual interests of children? That's a fair question to ask. And then why then also do certain adults, whatever they may be on within that acronym, the Pride acronym, whatever they claim to be, why do those adults need to be affirmed by children in their lifestyle choice? So if I, as a Christian man, went to children and said, you need to tell me that I'm a good Christian, white, male, and I want this to happen through the school system, they would lose their minds. They would say, we're not doing that. But somehow, when it comes to the sexualization of children, telling men who dress up in perverted costumes as drag queens, that's okay. And you know what? We're going to normalize this for the kids. And then we're going to tell the kids that it's okay that you go ahead and pick a gender, and you know what? Let's block that puberty. Let's stop that process, and then let's maybe even, who knows? Let's maybe have a gender conversion surgery, for you on the horizon. Completely irreversible procedures that we are telling children it's somehow safe to do. It's okay to try, but it's not. 100% it's not. There is zero data to support it whatsoever. And even if it were somehow irreversible, it's ridiculous to tell a child they maybe were born in the wrong body. But that is exactly what is happening in our schools, and people need to do more than just throw stones at it and roll our eyes. We need to dig deeper and do something about it. So I guess we've had enough with Gen D and the gender benders. Who
And
wants to
that
see
is
that happen anymore?
exactly why Jay and I have been speaking out at our local school board because of this sort of propaganda, this sexualization of children. And if you're sitting at home shaking your head, bewildered by what you're seeing, it gets worse.
It
It
does get
gets
worse.
worse. So, in our local school system, as I alluded to earlier, there's a regulation that came about back in 2021 that was revised this past year. Jay, why don't you give our audience a little feedback on this regulation, how it got started, your opinion on it?
Yep, will do. And just to add to the pressure that happens in our institutions, so people are aware the Liberal government has GBA plus, gender-based analysis plus. They do everything through that equity inclusive lens, shall we say, diversity, DEI, whatever you want to call it, which by the way, they say diversity, equity, inclusion. We say discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination. So feel free to use that one. People seem to like it because it explains exactly what's going on. Again, they're trying to hijack words that they have no idea what they really are intended to mean. But our liberal government uses GBA plus on how they actually run government, how they do business. And that trickles down into provincial government, into our municipal governments. Your Ministry of Education didn't start pushing this just all of a sudden on their own. We allowed this into our system. These people have been elected and they feel emboldened to do this. Your vote matters. But back to the regulation. The regulation number is RAD 65. And that regulation has the title of Gender Identity and Gender Expression in Schools. So, in general, we don't want people being bullied in school. We want the kids to be comfortable. We want the kids to enjoy going to school, have a good learning experience, by all means. Of course, we do. And those policies and regulations are already on the books, they already exist. But this regulation attempts to add to it. And what was a problem in 2021 with this regulation that we called out in addition to the bad books, one of the key issues here is the usurping of parental authority because they say that if the child chooses, they can keep the secret from their parents. Only the teacher, school staff may know. Inevitably, other students would know, and then I presume other parents would know. But the parents of the actual student wouldn't know that maybe they want to change their gender, their their pronouns, and
Their
perhaps
name?
their name. And so they might go do or be something different while they're at school versus while they're at home. In a sense of double life, that leads to a lot of, I believe, a child that would be in distress, hard to handle, and then the parents now are in the dark and they don't understand why their child is upset, but it's because they're lying to their parents, and the school board and the schools are a part of this deception, and they are encouraging their children to do that because they try to make the call on whether or not, really truly in complete ignorance, because how could they know that within that home that somehow it's unsafe. So it's unsafe because they don't affirm the child in what would be, you could refer to as just gender confusion at that point. That's not unsafe. That's a parent who's going to be parenting their child. and raising them up, as we would say, as Christians in the way they should go. And that is not the school's call. Just because that child crosses a threshold of a school doesn't mean they give over the authority of being a parent to the school. That is not done. And in everything else, the child needs to consent. But in this case, they're saying, no, the child doesn't have to consent on what arguably is the most sensitive topic that that child will face in their early lives. So it's really twisted and maniacal. But then what happens now in 2025 when it comes up for revision? Do they consider perhaps removing that or just removing this regulation altogether? No, they don't do that. Instead, what they do is they triple down and they say, we're not only going to keep secrets from parents, but now we want to add mixed gender sports and mixed gender spaces. So girls playing sports with boys, girls going or boys going into girls' spaces, or vice versa. But I think the greater concern would be a boy going to girls' spaces, because there is a mismatch there in strength, and it's not a safe at all safe thing to do. And I shared the headlines with the school board. I told them, I said, you don't want to be the next headline, but they choose to ignore all that and the risk, and they just seem to just continue to power through and do what in their minds is right despite the opposition. So that's what the regulation is today. What's, I guess we would say, going through committee for approval. The board, I don't believe, has actually approved it. I'm not sure if they've really finalized the wording, but because it got sent back to committee by voting of the trustees, which we thought was miraculous, gave us a chance to go back and speak again on this, which we did, and I was able to present the data from their public consultation. So the school board should be always upholding public confidence and ensuring student achievement. Those are at the tops of their list priorities for the school boards and schools according to the Education Act. And so this is what they're supposed to be doing. And so in doing that, they do seek public consultation for this regulation. So there's a portal that's put up for about 2 weeks, which I really think, as we'll explain shortly here, it should be longer. But for 2 weeks, the public is allowed to give their feedback through this public consultation portal. So that was done. And the committee kept saying and feeding back to the board, well, there's maybe, some, not everybody's in agreement, but it's generally it's supported. There's some opposition, but in general, according to the phone calls, emails, and messages that I've received, it's really people are supporting this. So we said, prove it. Show us the data. If you're so sure of this, show us the data. And they wouldn't listen to us. So then we'd be back in the gallery, kind of once in a while, chirping up, saying, show us the data, trying not to get kicked out again. But we're like, hey, show us the data. If you're so sure of it, show us the data. They wouldn't do it. So we ended up paying $210 to have a Freedom of Information request be submitted and acted upon, which they did. And they provided redacted documents, but we could see the comments and you could make a call on whether or not they were for or they were against. It was very clear whether or not they were for or against. Either they're saying there's two genders, knock it off. I don't like this woke garbage. I'm going to take my kids out of your school if you keep this up. Or they're saying I'm in full support of this. Keep trans kids safe. Make sure that they feel included, so on and so forth. So by taking that data and then looking at all these comments, 400 or so of them, I was able to classify them as either for or against. And like I said, people might say, well, that's subjective. You're making a judgment call. No, I'm telling you right now, it was either for or against. It was rather clear. And
We have that
we
data
have the data.
to show you. So let me pull that up so Jay can explain exactly. And here it is.
Yep. So that's a graph that I made. And at the end of my last speech, this is what I was speaking to. At the end of my last speech, I asked them when I was off mic, my speech was over. I said, "Would you like me to share my analysis with you?" And all I got back was a curt, "No, thank you." And then I kind of laughed and I said, "I didn't think so." But it would have been nice, and I could still send it to them. But at the same time, I think it's important that just the public sees this. So this is RAD 65 public consultation responses. These are cumulative responses left to right along the x-axis going from February 10th to February 24th. Just the way the graph is showing, it doesn't show the very last day, but it's basically 2 weeks. On the y-axis, on the left is the response count. F is for, A is against, and like I said, on the x-axis is the response date and number. So there's on each date there was multiple responses on that day. So as you can see, the blue is the for count, people who actually want keep secrets from parents, to have mixed gender sports, mixed gender spaces. People we would believe most of the people watching this would disagree with. So that's the blue curve, and you can see it quickly rose up to around the 50 count, but we had a very slow rise for the against count. And my suspicion there is that the people on these committees, a lot of times they ensure it's people who are on their side. They're not really looking for, objective contributions and for all voices of the community to be heard. That is not the case. That is a 100% lie, and trustees have been disciplined over that, or heavily criticized at a minimum, saying, "Oh, no, 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 no. How dare you say that you want a more diverse board? We have everybody here we need." So it's not objective. But so that's the suspicion there on why the early rise. But then it flattened out and it rolls over to the point that on February 18th, at the second arrow, you can see a count of 123. So where for and against are equal on that date, that's where they cross. And you can see the trend line for the against is a linear, rapidly increasing trend line. But you can see the for against, the for count trend line is flat. And so from that point forward, you got a 9.3 time increase compared to those who were for. So there's 262 who were against and 138 who were for. So the 66%, how we would refer to that is that is a strong majority who are against. Now, however, the kicker here is, and I said this in the speech as well, is that not only is there a strong majority opposing this regulation, that they're saying there's actually support for somehow, some way, in their minds justifying that. But if you were to continue this out for 2 weeks or even another month, you would end up with 8 or 9 out of 10 people, respondents, saying, if this trend line continued as it is, saying we are against this regulation. So the school board has misrepresented the data. And you know what? If they want to challenge my data, if they want to say, here's our own analysis, by all means, please, please, I ask you to please bring your own analysis to the table. Challenge me, prove me wrong. I dare you. Please try. But because this, I believe, and I've gone through this a number of times, trying to ensure that the data integrity is correct. As an engineer, that's important to us. And graphs are something that is a key tool that we use. So this is not a new approach for me. And so as you can see here, that's the point, is that people are actually strong majority and then some against this regulation, but still the school board persists in this depravity.
So the point of showing you the graph was to reiterate that the school board is saying, oh, our feedback that we've heard, people are for this regulation, yet the public consultation that once again was open to the public for 2 weeks shows otherwise. And when Jay offered to show the graph to the trustees, their response was no, thank you.
Yeah.
And one could speculate they either are oblivious, they haven't actually looked at the data, or they don't like the results of the data.
Hmm.
Who knows? Nobody wants to comment specifically on the actual data.
Yeah.
But the reason we're bringing this to your attention is that these are the types of things that are happening in school boards. This is our specific school board. So you might be thinking to yourself, well, if this is happening in Windsor, Essex County, what exactly is happening in my community?
Hmm.
And as advocates for children, as people who have stepped up, confronted the trustees, A, with their own data, and B, with the harm that they're doing with these policies, we can tell you that they're trying to keep secrets. They're trying to keep citizens and parents in the dark about what they're doing. And if you are a parent, you're a concerned citizen, you're a Christian, your responsibility is to not only protect children, but as a taxpayer, as electing trustees to their position, it is your job to hold them to account.
Hmm.
So, Jay, we always like to give our audience practical ways that they can do the research, that they can make a difference, that they can get answers. Why don't you tell our audience some ways that they can get to the bottom of what's happening in their community with their local school board?
Sure. Yeah, and I think it's important to say there are a lot of resources out there in this way as well in terms of what you can do for your own research. A few examples that come to mind that we had discussed earlier as well was that the such as the National Institute of Health has, some people confuse transgender with intersex. They're not the same. We're not talking about people that are 0.018% of the population who are intersex, meaning there actually is a physical mismatch in terms of their genitals. But transgender means that in your mind you are actually thinking you're a different gender than what is clearly obvious from what you were told when assigned as a baby and told by a doctor, who clearly knows what he's talking about, and so does just a common sense individual. But also, there's the resources there. There are papers out there like that. So that's National Institute of Health, and it had to do, and there's actually a study on intersex. Again, 0.018% are intersex. That is not transgender. Another resource is sometimes things happen outside of Canada before they happen in Canada, right? And so in the UK, The Guardian has an article on how their uh, they call it their Human Rights Commission, their Equity and Human Rights Commission, I believe is what it's called. They have said that trans people have been lied to, that there is no such thing because they were offered, I think, some benefits and then they were taking those back. And they're saying that you were never rightfully given those benefits because being transgendered is a lie. And this is in the UK, so it's something to read up and to understand. And so there are other examples like this where there's a lot of sources out there in the news, and again, stories about girls who have competed in male sports. So women who have basically competed against men, not only lost and destroyed the spirit of sport, but also been injured in these situations. So there are also a lot of sources like that you can also see. And then in addition, and these are links we can share, just the how much more at risk transgender people are for suicide ideation, self-harm, and other negative effects of, I think, the mental, physical, and spiritual toll that this lifestyle takes on a person. It's real. And and people are not being told about these risks and these dangers. They're saying, hey, it's safe. Have at it. It's reversible. It's not. It's not. And so, but in terms of options and other things that you can do, your trustees are elected. They have constituents. They are accountable to you. So you can write the trustees, hope they will respond to you. You can write to the Ministry of Education, hope they will respond to you. There are also ombudsmen who are there to investigate breaches of the code of conduct for a trustee. So if a trustee, if you believe, has acted wrongly against you as a constituent, you can report them to the ombudsman and they will do an investigation. And in addition, in terms of your MP at the federal level or your MPP at the provincial level, you can write them letters as well and expressing your opposition to what is happening. And they do look at the number of responses that they receive. It does matter and it should matter. So people understand, to put this in context, if you do a petition at the federal level, if it is sponsored by an MP, and you have 500 or more signatures, that petition must be read in Parliament. So when you think about what's happened here locally, and sad to say, there's one where they renamed the Kingsville School, which is a different topic, but similar in that they've renamed it, and twice they renamed it into the name the acronym of which would be vulgar. So they did it once, they received heavy opposition, so they did rename it again, but they repeated their error a second time. The petition was put up, 2,850 or so signatures. I think it's 2,830. Either way, over 2,800 signatures saying, you screwed it up again. We don't want this name for our school. But the trustee and the committee said, it's done. This is what we're going to do. And they completely ignored the public. So when you think about that, just in a municipality, 2,800 signatures and they ignore them. Like, that's pretty discouraging. But then also, I did a petition on this, and I think it's about 800 signatures of people I would say locally here, who are opposing this regulation. It just seems irrelevant to them. But why it's worthwhile to go to these school boards and speak, take advantage of whatever opportunities you have, is because out of this has come a lot of media exposure. So that we have been in the Windsor Star. Brian McLeod has written some excellent articles. You can look it up. Windsor Star, Brian McLeod. That's MacLeod. And as well as CTV, even CBC, even AM 800. A lot of some media outlets that you might think, I don't know if that's smart to actually share your story with them. But I would tell them, and I would say it's probably good to use these words. First of all, if you're being recorded, record yourself. Second, if you are going to give a statement, if they're going to interview you, say to them, I'm trusting you with what I'm sharing with my story. I need you to report it accurately and in context. If you don't, then there won't be any more interviews. And I have found that has worked out well, and they have reported us. I'm not saying that they've actually reported in our favor, because actually we want them to just report, really truthfully. But I would say that in general that they have done a good job reporting, particularly the Windsor Star. I think there's been some really good articles there asking some really solid questions as to what's happening in these school boards and why is it happening. Not that they're taking sides by any means, but just objectively presenting the facts, and hopefully people are drawing their own conclusions. So there's that. Then I think we would also agree, Beth, maybe you want to share a little more on this, that go be a trustee. Actually run to be a trustee on your school board. So whether that's your English public school board or the French public school board or the English separate school board or the French separate school board, go be a trustee and be on that board and influence that board. Learn what the bylaw is for the board. Understand Robert's Rules of Order, because that is what is used on how they actually run a board meeting and how you can motion, have a seconder, have debate, and then have a vote, how it's counted, what a point of order is, all the rest of it. If we go and do that and good people get into those positions, we will inevitably and ultimately change what's happening. But, you know, as a Christian, I believe God calls us to go out there and to be ambassadors, to actually to take up that challenge, to charge the hill. And a lot of times we're too busy having, and pardon the term, and I don't mean to criticize people for doing what they can do when they can do it, because not everybody has always the availability. But sometimes, and I think people will understand where I'm coming from on this, we won't break our holy huddles to actually go out into the world where God's called us to go. So I think that's something fair to say, and it's an encouragement. I'm not here trying to criticize people, and I find it difficult. I think Beth finds it awkward at times as well, you know, but when you get into the situation, God will give you the words to say, and He will give you the boldness and the courage to see it through. And that's how faith grows. It doesn't grow because, you know, you're thinking really hard, meditating, or just continuing to study, study, study. You have to apply, apply, apply. And that's how your faith grows. And that's really how we mature as Christians and as people. So I guess that would be some of the ways I could say that people can go out there and be a part of the solution. And of course, there's also running as MPP and MP. Find a good party to be a part of. CHP obviously is the Christian Party for Canada, and you know we really need to go out there and make some noise, rattle some chains, and not take no for an answer. We need to be more aggressive with what we're doing, and realize that what was done in the Bible and throughout all the stories in the Bible and what was done by Paul, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Jesus, you know, and Esther, and so many of these examples, they didn't back down. They said, "This is what needs to be done. I'm gonna go do it." And it doesn't mean that we're being hateful. What is hateful is lying. So if you're lying to a child, guess what? That's hateful. If you're telling the child the truth, even when it hurts, that's loving. And what they're doing right now is lying to children, and they are being hateful in our schools, in the public schools. So the other excellent option that I hope everybody will consider as well is Christian private schools. So getting your kids out of the public schools, getting them into Christian private schools. And people need to understand that option. It's a really good option. Yes, in Ontario, we don't have any government funding, and perhaps that's a good thing because they can't then corrupt the curriculum. However, there is a cost. So a hybrid model, maybe it's $5,000 a student, up to 12,000 and up. But then it falls off quickly if you get a family rate. The point being, the worldview of the educational institution that your child is in matters. And if they got the worldview wrong, they're going to get the teaching wrong. And so we've proven that. Now, ironically, if we go back in time, how did our schools start? Well, they were Protestant and Catholic. There was at least we could say, a biblical foundation to these schools and wanting to educate people, wanting the children to grow up with a knowledge and understanding. But that included the Bible in the school. And ironically, now we've got Bibles out of school, or it's on a shelf, but it's only there to, fill space. And instead, they put these absolutely atrocious garbage books that are violent and perverted, and it's a real sad thing. So I think in a sense we're kind of kidding ourselves that this public school system will in some way come back around in the near term. The only way they're going to listen is by getting your kids out. Because when the enrollment is down, their funding is down. And I'll tell you right now, our local school board is in the red to the tune of $6.4 million. And so that's exactly where they need to be and stay. And they need to be even more in the red. And we need to actually move the children out into the Christian private schools, grow their enrollment, grow these schools and their facilities and what they can offer. And then we actually become a force that needs to be acknowledged. And then the governments will have to listen to us because of the numbers that are enrolled. It doesn't mean that we have even 50% of the enrollment. We're talking 10, 12, 15, 20, 30% would be great, but I think there's a debate on that. The point being, get your kids out, and we've heard it said before, if you allow your children to go to Rome, expect them to come back Romans, and that's all the more true nowadays. And that's why, even though we were kicked out of the school board meetings, we've gone back into the committees, and we're getting into the media because we want to expose what's happening. So yes, you may take some lumps. Yes, when you go out there and you voice your concerns, will you receive opposition? Expect it. Expect it. But there are a lot of allies out there. A lot of people will come alongside and support you. And it needs to be out into the sunlight as the best disinfectant. We have to make this known. And there's a lot of ways that we can go about doing that. But I will say that increasing Christian private school enrollment is a major, I would say, lever in in changing the focus and in moving the needle on what our children are being taught in our schools.
Absolutely. I think we've given the audience a lot to think about tonight, and I really hope that you will take the time to start investigating your own local school board, taking our advice. There's many things that you can do as a citizen, as a parent, as a Christian to make a difference in your community. And our first priority should be protecting the innocence of our children. As Jay said, we've gone back, we've taken our lumps, but we keep going back, and we're going to continue to keep exposing the corruption and these policies that are sexualizing our children. We're not going to stop. And I actually would like to thank Rod for giving Jay and I the opportunity to come on to CHP Talks and expose these things to a national audience so that parents everywhere across this great nation will defend their children, will find out what's happening, and we can all stand together to protect their innocence and to get our schools back. But Jay's right. I think in the grand scheme of things, we need to start focusing on private Christian schools so that our children are being educated in a loving, nurturing, biblical environment. I think that is the best thing that we can do for our children. And a shameless plug for myself, I highly encourage you to check out my podcast, The Truth Trumpet, which is on Rumble. That channel will give you plenty of examples of Jay and myself and others speaking in front of the school board. You can see for yourself that it's really not that hard. You just have to have a little confidence and put in a little time, some research, and put your trust in God, because He will truly give you the right words to say if you put your trust in Him. So once again, thank you for joining us here on CHP Talks. We look forward to seeing you again, and God bless.
God bless. Thanks.